use it yourself, because you really have to work with yourself to be able to deliver what you wish, what you want to deliver, because that's the work. It's very difficult, and then analyze. Okay, if it didn't come out the way you wanted, if the whatever you said or whatever you did, then it's always good to explain that to your child that you made a mistake. I made a mistake, because they need to understand that there are mistakes, that we are alive, and we're living all together, and there is not always perfect what we do. I think it's important for them. So if we do something that we think, okay, this was not positive discipline, rethink, and even sometimes agree with them, if they say something that it makes sense, because we're not perfect. We have to remember that too.
Yeah, mistakes. This was later for today, but you're bringing it up now, so we'll go to it. It's talking about mistakes as opportunities for learning.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that's it's a big concept of positive discipline, is that mistakes are opportunities for learning. And I think that the way we first transmit that idea to children is to be compassionate with ourselves when we make mistakes as parents. What do we model as parents when we screw up, or we make a mistake, or we spill something or break something? Do we get upset with ourselves? Do we yell and curse? Do we get all down? Or do we find a solution to the problem and show that these things can be worked through? So it begins with modeling, right? Modeling this idea.
And that is ingrained in the school, talking out the school in anything we do. So the kids understand, and that gives them the space and the freedom to say, not to be hard on themselves, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let's say they didn't have a class ready for that day. Okay, we can do it the next day. There's a flexibility that I think they need to learn for life, because we have so many demands, right? So many things going on. As they grow, it's going to be more. When they're teenagers, when they go on their own. So I think we have to make sure we understand that too.
Yeah.
That we don't have to have the perfect answer or the perfect, at the moment. We can always go back to it. And it does take a lot of work, positive discipline.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And this actually ties in also, this goes back to judgment also, about a mistake being something bad. That's just an idea.
Yeah.
Just because something doesn't turn out the way that we wanted it to or expected it to doesn't mean that's bad. Maybe it was supposed to work out that way.
That's right.
Or maybe the mistake was necessary because there was a bit of learning that needed to happen. So this really, a lot of these concepts really do challenge our most fundamental assumptions, and I think that's why sometimes it's hard for parents to kind of put this into practice.
Yes.
And you really need to practice it, because it's not going to just happen just like that. You can't just decide to implement these things, because they really do challenge our underlying, often unconscious assumptions.
It takes many years. I'm still learning. I've been using positive discipline for a long time, maybe 20 years or more, or actually, let's say 25, consciously, right? And every week I learn something new. It's just so we have to be patient with ourselves, because it does take a lot of work. And also we have to be convinced that this is the right way to go, because as Jason said, the rest is going in a different direction. Anything else around is going in a different direction.
Yeah.
The parents ask, when they come and visit the school, they ask, okay, how do you do without tests, or scores? How do you evaluate the students? Because we're not giving rewards or awards or any, grade that could be something like that, right? That could be taken as a reward, an A or something. How do you know that they are learning? And it's really not expecting that to be, the result. We're not focused on the result. So all of that is part. I'm just trying to connect, all the things we do in the school with positive discipline, because we actually are using it all the time, in everything, in the academics.
It's just embedded in the way that you relate to children.
Yeah, so we don't give it a grade, and it's fine. And actually, it's actually better. It's better.
By the way, a lot of the materials that I have to hand out today, and a lot of the tools that we'll be talking about today, come from this positive discipline workbook. And this is a really good resource for parents if you're interested in picking this up. Just kind of practical ways of thinking about the concepts.
Dr. Nelson.
Yeah, it's by Jane Nelson. Yep, positive discipline workbook for parents.
There's a website where you can get, so it's positive discipline, I guess that
What kinds of ideas did you guys grow up with in terms of mistakes? How were mistakes responded to when you were, growing up? What were you taught about mistakes? Would you say? I don't know. If you can reflect for a minute on that.
Do you want us to make you cry?
Depends on which parent was.
I could make you cry.
So not very positive, I would imagine.
So when I brought a test home with a 99, the comment was, "Where's the extra point?"
Yeah.
So that's what I got.
Right.
That is missing in the cup,
Yeah.
right?
Mm.
Not the water that is in the cup. Looking at that water.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
I try to look at it as a positive thing, instead of harping on it, making you try to work a little bit harder. But when you look at it in terms of the book and think about it, it's very sad.
We talked.
Yes.
We talked last week. Even if you had brought home like a 70 or something,
Yes, that was a good example.
We
Yes.
talked about that last time. Why not focus on the 70% or the 99% the child got right
Yes.
first? Wow, look at how much went right here. The
Yes.
70% is still way more than half. You got a lot more right than you got wrong. So why not do that first, and then take a look at the 1% that you got wrong, and let's see what we can do about that. Let's see how we can fix that. But
Yes, but that's an example of how the system is really going in a different direction, because you don't even need the 70 or the 99 or anything like that, because the work of a child is unique. And so as long as you expect them to do their best, right, and you encourage them to do their best could be for one, it's so relative, having the percentage or the numbers are so, because you cannot really compare it to children. There's no way, no by age, no by capacities, because they all have different gifts. So how can you even think that is the way to go, or then even, so if you just take that away from the whole educational system, you don't need to worry about looking at the 1% or the 30% that is left, or 70 or all of that, because you understand that education is unique to each person, and what they can do is different. About not just studying math, about sweeping the floor or socializing, all of them have different gifts, and that's where we have to focus actually on the gifts, instead of in a percentage, I would say. So it's very individualized, right? It's very different.
It's a very enlightened viewpoint, though, and I was trying to think of why it's so enlightened and why it's so hard to practice this, and I think it goes back thousands of years, where the difference between a good baby and a bad baby, or right and wrong, meant death sometimes. So in order to stay alive, humans had to invent these rigid systems so that we wouldn't perish, we wouldn't be eaten by a wild animal or something. There was good behavior and bad behavior. I think that's so ingrained in us.
It is.
It's very hard to get out of. This is a very enlightened viewpoint, which I think will take a long time to spread.
That's a good point. This maybe is a relatively modern viewpoint, and you're reminding me of a bit of our conversation last time also regarding the brain development, right? The lower parts of our brain, the brain stem and the reptilian brain, the reptilian brain and the mammalian brain, so those are much older systems. They've been much more ingrained. They've been established tens of thousands of years ago, whereas the cortex is a much newer evolution. It's a much newer development in human evolution, and it's that part of the brain which is involved with doing the kinds of things that we're talking about. So it does take a much more conscious effort.
Yes. Actually, when we spoke about the heart, the palm, the heart in the palm, or
the brain in the palm,
brain in the palm, and I think it was last workshop, and we said, the kids push the button, right, and then you go with a primitive reaction. Using the primitive part of the brain. It comes from nowhere, from maybe a long time ago. Yes, you're right. So the reactions we have come from a long time ago too.
Right.
That's why it's so hard, because then we have to stop, do mindfulness, to take a break, right? With the short anything, and then think about it.
Yeah.
That's our work, and it's very, very difficult. Yeah.
I would imagine, I don't know if this is the case for you, but I would imagine that some children growing up with the mentality that even 99% isn't good enough would develop kind of a perfectionistic kind of attitude, that they would have to be perfect. And then there's no room for mistakes at all. And so every little mistake would be somewhat threatening to that child, somewhat threatening to that person. And you could see why, when they would make a mistake, they would react with that more primitive part of their brain, because it is a threat. literally. If you have to be perfect, and you know it's not okay to even make one mistake, then every mistake is threatening. So you would respond to it as a threat in that fight or flight kind of mode.
And they respond with anxiety, and
Yeah.
so it's a very unhealthy system. We have to understand that too. It's so unhealthy that teenagers are going through a lot. You know, we see that coming up, all the anxiety and the depression and all these issues when they are teenagers. But the system puts so much pressure on them on doing something perfect. Because if you think of not just the grades, the tests, you know, the machines are really evaluating the tests, and there is a little blank there where you have to say yes or no, or maybe, and which one is the correct answer. And so, and what is this about? You know, about knowing facts. You can Google them, right? So that's not education, but they base the education on that. And I have to say, I don't want to go on because it will become a whole other workshop, but it is based on the Industrial Revolution and trying to educate the masses. That's why we say we do have organic education in the school. And I came up with that term because it's really probably the easiest way to explain where we are going with this kind of education. To a very personalized, organic, healthy education. Because the other system is bringing health issues actually.
You're really inspiring me. We could spend all day talking about this.
Yes, that's why I said
I have so much that I want to
no
say, but I'm
problem.
trying to say.
Yes, and I will try to focus on this too.
So if we don't want to teach kids that they need to be perfect, how can we model that mistakes are okay? In the workbook here, and probably in the larger book, Jane has these 4 R's of recovery from mistakes. So a way that we can model for our children that mistakes are okay and mistakes are opportunities for learning. The 4 R's are to first recognize your mistake, so being aware that you've made a mistake. That would be a fairly obvious starting point, right? To reconnect, so a child has made a mistake, or we have made a mistake and we feel the need to apologize for it. We reconnect with the child, we go to them, we get down on their eye level. If it's a young child, we might even kneel so that we're eye to eye with them, so that we're less threatening and we're really kind of making a genuine connection. Reconcile, so make an apology if an apology is warranted. You know, I know there have been times that I've felt the need to apologize for either losing my cool, yelling, doing something punitive, you know, that I didn't intend. And then resolve. So recognize, reconnect, reconcile, and then resolve. And the resolve would be focusing on the solution. So that's really, it's not till the last step that you really get to, okay, what do we do about this? You know, often as parents, we tend to feel this rush to jump right to doing, before we've taken the time to reconnect, before we've taken the time to acknowledge actually what happened or what wrong was done or what our part was, before we've taken time to validate and empathize with feelings. All those things should be happening first before we go to, okay, what do we do about this now, you know? But once we do those things, then we should be focusing on solutions as opposed to wallowing in the mistake or, you know, focusing on blame and all of that. Let's talk about what to do about this now. And I know at home with Liam, I have, this is one I really try to, for myself, this is one of the ones that I try to use often, which is if he spills something, okay, Liam, what should we do about this? I don't rush to tell him what to do. I try not to get angry about it. Doesn't, you know, sometimes I can, sometimes I can't. But so what should we do about this? And then if you can't come up with anything, okay, do you think we should, how might we clean this up? You know, what do you need to clean this up? You know, do you need my help cleaning this up?
That's right. How can I help you too?
Right, and how can I help? Exactly.
How can I help you? So then they will figure out what they need.
Right. And usually he can come up with, you know, I need a paper towel. He knows where they are, so then he goes and gets a paper towel and he wipes it up. I'm not doing it for him, you know. So I'm still holding him accountable, but I'm trying to do it in a kind way. You know?
And it's so important what you say as they grow. You will see you will need to use that more and more because if you provide the solutions all the time and you rescue them all the time, then we spoke about this in the first workshop. They will feel helpless, that they cannot really do things for themselves. So we have to make sure we focus on that the kids are very capable and that we trust them that they can do it because they feel powerful too while doing it. It's as simple as, you know, what can we do about it? But then that will trigger so many things, you know, as they grow, it will really empower them.
Yeah.
let's keep that present because it's super important.
You're reminding me of something I meant to say as kind of an opening remark kind of statement, which is that our expectations of kids, I think, are all out of whack. Like on the one hand, we expect too much of our children, and then on the other hand, we expect way too little of them. So on the one hand, we expect them to show us skills that are developmentally inappropriate for their age. We expect a 2-year-old, 3-year-old, 4-year-old to control their impulses.
Or not to have a tantrum.
Or not
That's
to have
impossible.
a tantrum, right? Those are the kind, we have those expectations, and yet at the same time, we don't expect them to do basic things they can do, like put on their own
Put their pants on, exactly.
Put their pants,
Yes.
you know?
Or actually pour the water in the cup. You know, we teach them at the school, you hold it here and you do it up to the belly bottom here, and then that's good enough. And they're happy with that.
Right.
You should tell
Right.
them, you know, it goes there and they're so proud of themselves, you know, talking about pride and all that.
Right.
They feel good about themselves. And
Right.
that's
We
so
don't give
important.
them enough credit.
No.
Because once
Yeah.
my son started,
Hmm.
you guys were giving me feedback about like things he could work on, and these were things that, like, even just for in the name of efficiency, with getting dressed and getting out of the house, like I just wanted to go. But then it was pointed out, well, we could be working on this. I mean, in a week he was mastering these skills,
Yes.
no problem.
Yeah.
Right.
So we're not giving them enough credit about their abilities.
Yes.
That's definitely something I've learned
Yes.
recently with my own son. We don't give them enough credit.
Yeah.
And then what you're saying, like we're expecting them to not have all these impulses and regulate their emotions perfectly, and that's asking too much in a lot of cases.
Mm-hmm.
We have a couple of pictures, and one is with Jason's son, with Liam, right? He's washing his hands in the bathroom, and the pad is backwards, so he has actually the front and the back, which I love that one. And the other one is a child going down the steps with the boots, you know, the wrong feet. And I always told her, I had to write a blog about it, because that tells so much that, you know, whoever was with the child gave the child the opportunity to do it, the time, you know, no rush, because you need more time if a child is going to do it. So, and then focusing on the process. That's when they're learning, the process, not the result of the boots have to be in the right place or the pant has to be, you know, he didn't mind, right? It was so cute actually.
And I've gotten so many comments about backwards pants over time from people. I've caught a lot of flack for letting him go out of the house with backward pants.
I got my phone and took a picture. He was just loved it.
How do you respond to that? Because I
Yeah.
had that issue.
To the comments.
Yes,
From
how
other-
do you deal with that?
It's a good question. Sometimes I just ignore.
Yeah.
Sometimes I just kind of like let it go. I ignore because sometimes it's not said directly to me. It's just a comment. It's just a comment generally made. Oh, what are you doing with your pants backwards?
To Liam or to?
To Liam.
To Liam.
To Liam. Yeah, often to Liam. So sometimes in his defense, I'll jump in and I'll say, Liam put his pants on all by himself today. That's the way he wanted to wear them. You know, just to let him know it's okay. You know. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I had another thought, but I lost it. That's okay. Let's talk about positive.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Do we have any more for praise and encouragements, or do you want an encouragement, or do you want to go back to that at the end?
Go back to what? Do you want to talk more about that
No,
concept?
I'm not sure if that was, is it clear now
Oh.
why we should use encouragement and not praise?
Are there questions or comments about the use of praise and encouragement?
I think I understand. I think my only question would be, do you feel compelled to train those in your environment who might have regular contact with your child, or how much of that would you expect or encourage? Because as we said, this is going on in all of society, so
Yeah.
you can't control your environment all the time, but
And you can pass along the book maybe to, you mean
So
family?
you mean like, do you want, like, should you be correcting people when they're
Yes.
making those comments?
yes.
I guess it depends who that person is.
Okay.
Yeah, right. If it's in the family, I mean, there are different ways to get familiar with this. Audible has, you know, positive discipline books. That's a way for some people that drive long, you know, they are not used to reading a book. Or I would encourage the family to jump into the use of positive discipline. And maybe a shortcut answer for whoever is questioning anything we say or we do is just say, I use positive discipline. And then they may ask for more information.
I think you're hinting
Yeah.
at the fact that it would be ideal for everybody involved with the child to be on the
Yeah.
same page with this, to help grandparents understand what babysitters are that's ideal. That would be great.
Yeah.
It's more feasible in some cases than others, you know. But
And also as a society, I think it's important that if I remember one professor telling me, when I finished, when I graduated, saying something that was very clear at that time, and then I've been trying to use it all this time along, and it's, knowledge is commitment. So if you know that this works better, make sure you commit to sharing it with other people. And I think it's important because we could make changes that way, small changes, but they spread out.
The getting dressed issue, I have addressed that with grandparents, because I know he'll go for a sleepover, and I see grandparents kind of helping him get his shoes on, get his pants on, worry about whether his shirt's backwards or forward, doing all that stuff for him. And I know full well he's been doing that he's 4, he's been doing it for 2 years, but by the time he was 2, he was putting his clothes on, and he still had grandparents dressing him. So that's one thing that I specifically explain to grandparents, that he's capable of dressing himself, so let him do this himself, please, when he comes over. So that was, for some reason, that was something I was comfortable sharing. There are other things that I'm not as comfortable correcting, so you just,
pick your battles.
Pick your battles. Pick your battles. Exactly. That's a great way to put that. Yeah. Let's talk about timeout, because that's a big kind of hot button parenting issue, I guess, right? Timeout is one of those most I don't know.
Controversial.
Well, controversial, but I guess just most used kind of consequences. It's just, right? When you say timeout is one of those things that you use all the time,
Yes, that they use we don't use timeout.
Right.
But yes, it's being used for, and you change. Sometimes there is a need of a time to think, for yourself or for the child. That's different. Take the time, or let's find a place where we can talk about it. And that is basically a timeout. But the way it's been used and the term is it means so much.
Right.
That we try not to use it, even though we may be doing a timeout. We try not to say timeout.
The way timeout is traditionally used, it's an opportunity for the child to go away from people, to think about the bad thing they've done, and come back when they're ready to do better. That's kind of the thinking behind it, right? Is that they're going to go, think about it, come to their own idea that, oh yeah, that was bad, I should do it this way instead, and come back. But really, it's usually used in a punitive, as a punishment.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And in that kind of negative state of mind that a child is inevitably going to be in when they've been punished and banished to the corner for a period of time, that's not the state of mind that a child is going to use constructively. They're not going to be able to think constructively in that kind of state of mind. They're more likely in that state of mind to be looking at the corner, thinking to themselves, how am I going to get back at this jerk who just punished me, rather than wanting to come back and do better. Or perhaps, in maybe a best case scenario, they'll be thinking about doing better because they want to get their privilege back, or they want to get back to the toy they were using, or back, whatever. But in that case, again, they're working for external reward, and we've already kind of covered extensively why that's not the ideal situation. So Jane Nelson talks about using a positive timeout. And again, it still has the word timeout in it, so ideally we just I think we just get rid of the word timeout altogether, but she talks about creating a positive timeout space somewhere in the house. There's even a book, not by her, but it's sold on the Positive Discipline website called Jared's Cool Out Space, and it's a book for kids. It's a children's book about this child who gets angry, about something, and then with his mother creates in his room a timeout space. He calls it a cool out space where he can go and cool out. And the idea is that really the child takes a large role in choosing where the space is going to be, I guess with guidance from the parent, maybe a corner of their bedroom or a corner of the living room or somewhere like that, and that the child gets to also decorate the space.
Yeah, create the space. Feels or she feels comfortable.
Exactly, in a way that's going to actually serve the purpose that we want it to, which is to provide that child an opportunity to cool off, learn to regulate their emotions, sit and have the experience of having the emotion come and go. Those are the executive functioning skills that we want kids to be developing. And traditional timeout will not help them to develop that, but a positive timeout space could potentially. So they've had a hand in designing the space. They can choose to decorate with comfortable pillows or blankets, or in the book Jared's Cool Out Space, they even like paint the walls of a corner of the room. I don't know, not many parents might want to go that far in painting walls, but maybe you do, and maybe you want to hang certain things and have certain pictures. But really, it's giving the child a sense of feeling empowered that this is my space, to take ownership over creating a space that then they might choose to use. And they might choose to use, they might not choose. So this is a space that's available to a child, not a space that's that a child is commanded to use at a given moment, because then it'll end up getting used in a punitive way. James suggests giving, in a moment when a child might need some help kind of regulating their emotions or making a different choice, the positive timeout space can be given as a choice, as an option. Would you like to go use your cool out space, or would you like to use the wheel of choice, or would you like to go outside and run around or do some jumping jacks? So parents can give options in those moments, and the positive timeout space can be one of those options.
Yes, and actually, as the kids grow, they can make a list of the options. Things that will help them feel better or regroup, reconnect with themselves, or think about something. So they could make a list. We do use that in the school too. So, and it works. They can choose from the list of 3 or 4, which is similar to the wheel of choices, right? 4 or 5 choices. Which one is the one you would like to use now? Because they don't work the same, doesn't work all the time. That's the other thing that I would recommend, to have an open mind, in the sense that not everything works for everything, or for every family, or for every situation. And we have to be very creative with positive discipline at the same time. You have to be all the time and flexible to understand that sometimes what worked last week is not working now. Or is getting into a habit and then it's just not working. So we have to be flexible.
Yeah, I agree with the creative part. I encourage parents to be very creative in the way that they kind of use this philosophy. You don't have to use it in a rigid way or stick to the tools exactly how they're scripted. If you feel you have a solid grounding in the philosophy and the overall approach and the kind of relationship you're trying to cultivate with your child and the kinds of skills that you want them to develop, if you have all that in place, then you can be creative in the way that you kind of go about, doing it.
Yes.
I think it's also helpful with regard to creating a positive timeout space to be able to model that also. So maybe we have our own space in the house that we model when we need to cool off. Okay, I'm going to my timeout space right now, or whatever word you want to call it, So to model it even as adults, it's okay to do that.
And sometimes it's the bathroom. I always say that because I would have another person and I bring my coffee, I sit down and read, and I take my time. And sometimes it's the only place where you can have privacy, at home, if you have little kids, right?
Yeah.
That they follow you around everywhere.
Yeah.
So.
I was reading Jared's Cool Out Space with Liam at home a while back, and the last page of the book shows the dad in the book, like sitting in the cool out space in a little, and Liam got a real kick out of that because he recognizes that sometimes I need a cool out space. So.
That's good.
Yeah. Do you guys have? Does anybody here kind of use any space like that, or have you used the old school version of timeouts, and how has that gone for you?
I have definitely looked at my son and said, we need to take a break for both of us, and asked for him to sit on the stairs for 60 seconds. I'm not asking for a ton of time, but sometimes he needs a little bit of a reset button. And I mean, what's funny to me is there's nothing keeping him there, but I will say, go take a break for 60 seconds and I'll start the timer that he can see, and he'll just go and do it on his own, and he's not being forced and nobody's yelling. It's just saying, we need a quick second, and he'll do it on his own. So I think I hope he's seeing how that's helping both of us in that moment, because it's not being forced upon him. He's doing it willingly. So yeah, definitely old school timeout. But it helps in my case sometimes if he is overstimulated or we're just not getting along in that moment. That 60 seconds on the stairs gives him a reset button that works sometimes.
It sounds like you're making it about both of you, though. It's not just about him. It's that we together need a bit of a pause.
Yeah,
So let's
well,
do
right,
that.
things are gonna spiral if they
Yeah.
don't. So
Yeah.
yeah, definitely.
Right.
That's a great teaching, learning experience we're giving to him, or anything later on too, to
Yeah.
take that time and then feel better. Yeah, it's really great to reset, like you said. That's a good way to say it.
Right.
To reset. Yeah.
And I think there are times when it would be okay also to accompany the child in timeout or the cool out space, wherever it is. It doesn't necessarily have to be this punitive thing where the child is alone. Like you can be sitting there next to them. It could just be that, okay, this is a time where neither of us are talking. This is quiet time right now, but but you don't necessarily have to distance yourself from the child.
No. For example, I have to say in the school, in the office, I have some toys, and it's not that they go to the office, because it's not, they come here and give me a hug sometimes too, but it's just a way, yes, we don't want the office to be like, but it's a way to be away from the group, right, to reset, let's say, and then be ready to go back and join the activity. And I do have toys there. There's like a pushing toy that the kids love, and you put on the floor and they go like this, and it spins, and it's like hypnotizes them so that they're ready.
I have
That's
one of those. I know what you
it's
mean.
great. So I recommend that toy. But if somebody walks in the school without knowing that we use positive discipline, the first reaction would be, oh, you're rewarding the child.
Yeah.
That
Right.
misbehaved.
Right.
Right? Look, he's playing with this toy that only you can get in the office, right? So we have to also be clear about that sometimes, other people, you were talking about what other people will think about what we're doing.
Yeah.
And so if you're really convinced that you're doing the right thing, you really don't have to worry about it. But I'm aware that some people or new teachers or so, it takes, I will say, at least a year for the training of the teachers too. Just because we come with a baggage of, all things that we think work.
Yeah.
And but that's one of the things I noticed. If there's a new or a prospective teacher, they will think, okay, are you rewarding this child that just
Right.
did that? That's the first thought, and it's really taking that time to feel better. It's about feeling better. If they feel better, they will behave better, and that's something Jane says, but that we have experienced in the school for many years. So if they feel better, they will behave better for
Right.
sure. Yeah.
Well, this concern about not reinforcing negative behavior or rewarding bad behavior, whatever, it comes back to the question of, is our goal in that moment to punish the child, or is our goal to help them learn? Is our goal to help them learn a skill or gain a skill in that moment? What's most important, So. And so as we go through this, I'll be passing out some handouts just so that I don't forget to give them to you at the ends. Not to get distracted with them now, but just to kind of reemphasize for when you get home some of these ideas we're talking about. That one I handed out was about the use of positive timeout. Should we talk about natural consequences a little bit?
Yes, we can.
Yeah. Okay. You wanna start with that? Yeah.
Natural or logical consequences?
Yeah. Let's talk about the difference between natural and logical consequences. Yeah.
So we talked about, just to go back to the simple way of understanding positive discipline, the punishments and rewards, right? So instead of punishments, instead of rewards, we use encouragement, we use other things, right? Instead of punishments, then what do we use for the child? So we use the positive timeout. We have other tools, right, for that. Natural consequences are natural. So for example, a child refuses to wear the coat to go outside and play, and then they get cold, right? So that's a natural consequence, because then the weather will show them that they feel cold if they don't have their jacket. Then logical consequences are the consequences that we set up as a consequence of a behavior. So you can set it up with your child, you can agree on what the consequence would be, which I think is, I would recommend that, but also you need to know when you tell a child what to expect, what in your mind you have to know what the consequence would be if the child is not doing what you expect, or what is expected, not what you expect. But for example, they have to get in the car and buckle, right? So okay, what's the consequence if they don't do it, if they refuse to do it? You have to have, as much as you can, that clear in advance, because it's very important to tell the children what to expect. And so to know what the consequence would be of something that you're expecting, sometimes it's not easy. Okay, what's the consequence of this if they're doing that? You know, that's why you have to be creative. And sometimes they will tell you what the consequence could be if you cannot come up with ideas. But it's very important for us that to understand that boundaries are also make them feel safe, and they are very important. It's not just about it's not about being permissive. We need to have those boundaries. So where the boundaries are is where the consequences are too, right?
Yeah.
And Jane Nelson actually stopped using consequences because parents got confused about punishments or consequences. What's a punishment? What's a consequence, right? The consequence has to be related to what happens. But so then now she's saying finding solutions,
Exactly.
something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, ideally, ideally, from the positive discipline perspective, you want our kids to learn as much as possible from natural consequences. So allow, like Laura was saying, allow the world to provide the consequences that the child will learn from. I think you and I differ slightly on this. I think you are more against logical consequences than I am. I think that, maybe I'm not true. And even Jane Nelson, she is getting away from the idea of logical consequences. A logical consequence is a consequence that does require a bit of a parent's manipulation. Like, it does require something on the parent's part, kind of creating the consequence. So, for example, a logical consequence would be that if the child doesn't stop playing video games when it's time to stop playing video games, then they don't have access to the video games because they've abused that privilege. It's not necessarily a punishment. More of in my view anyway, more of a punishment would be, oh, you came home late, no video games for a month.
It's not related.
It's not related.
Yeah.
Playing video games has nothing to do with coming home late. But so a logical consequence, in order to still be kind and firm and still be within the positive discipline kind of philosophy, has to be logically tied to what's happening, right?
Yeah. No, and I do agree with that, and we use them all the time, the logical consequences.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing is that what I mentioned is that you have to know what you expect and tell the child what to expect. It has to be clear from the beginning. It's not that you can just jump in and say, okay, now I'm going to remove the video games for you for the rest of the month, right? That doesn't work. That is the punishment. So you have to tell what to expect if you have it clear for you. And then if you don't, and something happens that you didn't even expect, because it happens, right? That there's a behavior, something that, then you sit down, take a positive time out, or just, whenever you find the time to talk and agree on what could be the consequence, because you cannot predict everything that happens, right? So, no, we use logical consequences all the time. Natural consequences are used, by nature, but we use all the time logical consequences.
Yeah.
They are super important.
Yeah.
It's just that the term of logical consequences is being confused with punishment sometimes. That's the only thing that I wanted to clarify.
Right.
Yeah.
And when possible, even better than using logical consequences would be focusing on solutions, like you said. So, okay, it seems like it's an issue for you getting off video games at 8:30 or whatever time you're supposed to get off. What do we do about this?
Yes.
Let's engage in a brainstorm here about how we can resolve this issue. I know how important it is to you to play video games. It seems you kind of lose track of time, where you don't want to stop when it's time, but it's very important for me that you do. What can we do about this? And see if the child can come up with some solutions. Maybe the solution is to have a visual reminder on the next to the television somewhere with the time that they're supposed to stop. Maybe that would. So engaging in a solution-focused kind of conversation about it. Do you want to? I don't think we've talked much about family meetings. Do you want to talk about family meetings? Because you probably have more experience using family meetings actually than I do.
Yes, I have, and I remember one in particular when I think I mentioned this before, when we decided to have a dog in the house, which I have to say, Sally is part of the family now. So I'm so happy we had the family meeting, because I was the one saying that I didn't want to have dogs in the house for various reasons. So my kids wanted to have the dog, and I didn't.
Sorry.
No, that's all right. I can start.
Okay, I'll get us you there. I didn't mean to distract.
Sorry.
That's all right.
Sorry.
No,
Yeah.
that's okay. I don't know if that's related to the family meetings.
No, it's actually not. I have a different family meeting.
No, that's okay, because just family meetings is that you set up a time to meet. It could be once per week, with an agenda that you have for whatever happened in the week, or it could be a meeting, for a certain topic that you have to discuss with your kids. In this case, it was about the dog, and so I gave them time to think about why they wanted to have a dog, and I gave myself time to think about why I didn't want to have a dog. I didn't want to have more work. That was, just to summarize, that was my idea. I really cannot take more work, more responsibilities in the house. So then, for me, the solution was that we were gonna share the responsibilities, right? But they had to think also of why they wanted a dog. So anyway, this was 10 years ago because 9 years ago because she's 11 now. And so Juana was 14, Francisco was 11. So you can do family meetings at any age, I will say, but then, it's different, the outcome. And I remember we agreed at that time that they were gonna give Sally a bath when she needed a bath. And we agreed on that. She was not gonna go on the beds. And okay, the first one still works. They are responsible for the bath, and I will not give in. So, because they took the responsibility, and now I have one at home, but sometimes it's Francisco. The second one didn't work. She is sometimes even in my bed. So, I mean, that was good because we couldn't, come to an agreement, and it's clear, and it actually stayed through the years. The agreement, I don't remember all the details, but it really worked for us in that sense. But you can do it with anything. That is an issue, and that it's an issue again and again, every week. And then, okay, what can we do to change the situation? So you sit down, and it's not that you sit down to have a positive time out because something was happening before. It's something more planned. And so they feel that we're talking about something important. And you can even write it down, you can have them write down the outcome, and that sometimes also makes them feel that it's more important, or that they have to stick with it, or you have to stick with it too, and to come to an agreement. So I would say it's very helpful to have family meetings.
Yeah, Jane Nelson suggests just scheduling weekly family meetings and having it be a reliable part of the weekly schedule, so Sunday night or whatever, and not long, 20, 30 minutes, depending on the ages of the kids, and the idea of having it scheduled consistently is that it's not just a reaction when something has gone wrong, because then it will seem like a punishment. Oh, you broke a window, we're having a family meeting today, No, that's kind of a punishment, So if an issue like that comes up, and you already have an established routine of having these family meetings, then it just becomes part of what you'll talk about at that meeting, but it is non-punitive, and the family meeting is a chance for the kids to voice their concerns and also to come up with solutions of their own.
And desires too, to say why you really want something.
Right.
Analyze. I think it's a great way. I could never have something scheduled weekly with my kids, or they would know, are you supposed to listen? They know. They would just say, that's a script from when, so I try to be more spontaneous, and I practice more. But I would say, even if you don't do it every week, if you do it with something that is important for you and for the kids, could be about a trip, let's sit down and talk about the trip, this is what we expect during the trip, what would you like to do, and you can just talk about that in advance, right? Or anything, a party, okay, we have a party next week. This is what happened, talking about it. It's really a good routine for them to dialogue.
Aside from Laura, does anybody else here use family meetings or any version of this concept at home? Or
I would say so with my child, not necessarily with the group, but trying to get more of the group on board.
Meaning the whole family unit?
Yes.
Yeah.
But it's helpful, especially when you say you have to prepare for something, or a decision has to be made about preparing for something. I think the more information that's out there, the better.
Yes, and kids that love routine, you can have an agenda, a weekly agenda, right? And then you can write it down. Maybe you don't talk about it that day, but you would do it on Saturday, like Jason said, if that's the day you set up. So you make a list of things. It could be for more than one thing. So you just sit down and talk and go through the list, especially when they're reading and writing, right? That they can put all the responsibility on the list. That's a good way also to do discipline, to passing the power to other things too.
And like if there's an event coming up that you know tends to be a difficult kind of, you know, you can say, you know, next week we're going to be doing this. Sometimes that's hard, you know, for whatever reasons. Let's talk about how we can make it go smoothly this time. You know? So preemptively as opposed to reactively having these things. Yeah.
Yes. And especially for kids that have sensitivities to sensory. Actually, yeah, that was very interesting what you found, that they created the sensory room now in places like, huge places in general for kids is overwhelming, right? For some adults too, going to huge places, right? Now they are creating like sensory rooms where kids can go and play. Did you know that?
There's restaurants with sensory rooms now.
They do?
Yeah, that
Oh,
they're catering
that's
to kids with spectrum disorders, and they're saying like we're welcoming you, and they have their staff is trained to be aware of any sensory issues that may be going on with the kids. I just read about a restaurant that they opened in New Jersey.
That's great.
Really?
Because some places are overwhelming for anyone.
Yeah.
But some kids are more sensitive to.
Like Wegmans on a Sunday for me.
I was just there. It's like what.
I need a sensory gym at Wegmans.
Yeah.
They have a play area in Wegmans.
Did they really?
They did, and they closed it for some reason, but I thought it was a great idea.
Oh, yeah, it was up front, right?
Yes, and it
Yeah.
wasn't a very loud, noisy. It was separate and quiet. And
Right.
they did away.
I could use a place to bounce off the walls. How about so you mentioned putting some of the onus on so routine charts. You reminded me of routine charts, the use of routine charts. You know, when you were saying kind of give the responsibility to an external kind of
Yes, a piece of paper.
kind of reminder. Exactly.
It
piece of
works.
paper. So how to get away from kind of nagging and constant reminding and taking responsibility for remembering things for kids and all of that. We may have talked about this in the last session, but it's worth mentioning again. The use of creating visual reminders and routine charts to aid with that process, so that we can do less of the verbal reminding, and children become more responsible for remembering on their own the kinds of things they're supposed to be doing. So maybe this is a big one that comes up in my private practice work. Actually, is how do I nag less? How do I get them to do? How do I get them to do in the morning what they need to do to get out the door for school without me constantly reminding and nagging, right? So creating a routine chart is one way, and involving the child in creating the chart. And there are all kinds of ways of doing this. On the handout, you'll see there are some examples. Maybe you'll take photographs of the child doing the 3 or 4 or 5 different things that they're supposed to do.
Especially when they're not reading yet.
Yeah.
Or drawing, they can draw
Yeah.
picture of something.
Exactly. They could draw the pictures of, okay, first I brush my teeth. Maybe it's a picture of a toothbrush. They could cut it out of a magazine. You could take a photo of them brushing their teeth. They could draw a picture of a toothbrush or anything else that they want to draw that would remind them to brush their teeth. And then I have to put my pants on. And there might be something for that. So you might, for a young child, you pick like 3 things that you want them to remember on their own, or even 2 things you want them to remember on their own, and have them make it, have them create it, so they take some ownership, and then have it posted in a place where they're going to see it, either a bedroom door or the bathroom door or wherever. And this is not about rewards. This is not about one of those behavioral reward systems where they get a check each time they do one of the things, and when they get a certain number of checks, they get a reward. This is not about rewards. This is simply
a reminder.
This is simply a reminder. This is simply about them learning to build their memory skills and take more responsibility for doing for themselves. That's what it's about. So if they're not doing these things, they don't get punished for it. Then you find other ways of helping them. Does anyone use routine charts or things like this at home?
I mean, I start every day by explaining exactly like what needs to be done through each part of the day and what we're going to do, because routine is very helpful.
Yes.
But I think that's a great idea with the chart, because I'm definitely walking around nagging. Through certain parts of the day. But yeah, routine in general has been very helpful. In my case.
And it's not going to happen overnight. Just because you post a routine chart doesn't mean it's going to work in every case, or it's going to be like the end-all, be-all solution. But you can simply, in the beginning, as the child is getting used to using it, you can simply remind them, or you can ask them, have you checked your chart today? Have you done the things on your chart? And you just say that, and you redirect them to the chart.
I also recently saw, when I was looking for how to help with transitions, there was a preschool teacher that was talking about how she has a clock on her wall, and instead of numbers, it's animals. And she said that it's helpful for her to say to her kids that the frog, we're going to do this, or you're going to need to have your clothes on by the frog, or we're leaving, or we're going to do that activity, and that for the younger kids it was helpful instead of expecting them to understand the concept of time. Having
they don't understand
having that visual aid for them to refer to was actually really helpful, because I know that we struggle with transitions sometimes, and that was one of the ways that I could see working well for in my case again with my child.
Yes, transitions are difficult for all children because they always want to play, and that's very healthy. And then when you have to do something that is not about play, or it could still be let's play to pretend that you're putting your shoes on. When you can turn it into a play, but they don't want a state of mind of play because that's how they live, that's their life. And so we have to understand we have to jump into transition sometimes, and we use that a lot. For example, if you cannot get the group to go to the door because they're playing with something or they're talking, as they grow, they have that social. And so then let's all jump as frogs to the door, and in 2 seconds you have the kids by the door. You don't have to say, I've been telling you for 10 minutes that we're here. Just jump as a frog because they live in a state of play. I mean, if you understand that, you understand that that's healthy for them. When children get sick, the first thing they lose is the instinct to play. So we have to understand we have healthy kids if all they want to do is to play. So then accompany them, and they need to accompany you at the same time, right? So you need them by the door, let's get it done. And sometimes that's what we have to be creative, because either that, or anything you find that works for you and your child, it's always good.
Yeah, we're gonna play. That's
Yes.
one of the first things clinically, and my clinic, when I have a child come into my office and I'm meeting them for the first time, one of the first things that I assess, one of the first things I look for is whether or not this child has the capacity to play.
To play, yes.
Because if they don't, that's something I want to help them develop.
Yes.
And if they do, that's a great strength, and I want to use that towards helping them with whatever it is I'm supposed to be helping them with. Because through play and imagination, they can come up with new solutions. They can shift their perspective. They can see themselves and others in a different way. They can act out their feelings, appropriately in a contained way. So play just provides so much for children. And when they can't play, that's kind of an issue. When they haven't developed that skill of imagination and pretend play, that is one of the first things that I try to encourage the development of. Because without that, it's going to be hard for a child who doesn't yet have the intellectual and verbal ability to think and talk their way through problems. Play is the way they need to do it.
Yes, and I actually had a professor who said that we should all as adults live in a ludic mode, which is the word ludic in Latin comes from play. And so if instead of saying, okay, I'm working Monday to Friday, and how people say it's Friday, right? So if you will enjoy what you do and you live it in a playful way, which I think teachers, we are closer to that understanding, because the kids are teaching us that all the time, right? And so in case we forget, that playful way of living makes you happy too. So it's not just for kids, if you really get into that, but that's for another workshop.
There are so many moments that so many difficult moments you can simply just turn around just by making it playful. If the kids aren't getting their clothes on, make it a game about getting their clothes on,
And they do it.
And they'll just do it.
They want to play.
Yeah.
Yes.
Exactly. There's a book called, you guys ever heard of the book Baby Monkey, Private Eye? It's a book about a baby monkey who is a private eye. Goes and looks for clues and solves cases, and Liam loves this book. And each chapter is very similar, but in each chapter the baby monkey's looking for something different. He's searching for something different. But in each chapter there's a few pages, a section where before the baby monkey can leave the office and go out and search for what he's looking for, he has to get his pants on. And because he's a baby monkey, he really struggles to get his pants on. And so there's a handful of pages of watching him like put the pants on his head and put them on backwards and struggle to get his pants on. Liam gets a kick out of that. I don't know why I felt the need to share that, but it makes the idea of a struggle playful. It makes the idea of struggling with something, and you make it playful, and suddenly it's not such a big deal that it's difficult getting your pants on when you're just learning to do it for the first time.
Yes. But it makes you also enjoy the moment, not just the child. Because play, is enjoyment. And so I recommend for adults, because as I said at the beginning, this is the work we have to do with ourselves. There's a fantastic book that it's called Homo Ludens. And I like it so much that I have based workshops in the past. 10 years ago, I've done workshops based on that book. It's called Homo Ludens. And it talks about Homo Ludens, which comes from ludic, from the Latin word that means to play. So living in that, you hear now probably is closer to saying being resilient, right? Or, going with the flow. All of those terms, they go along with that. And that help us enjoy every moment with the kids, because, routine and all the demands that we have to fulfill every day can make it difficult, right? To be on time everywhere and all that. If you have kids, it's a little more difficult. So getting into that way of thinking is very helpful, I think.
We have 10 minutes. I'm debating with myself which thing to do here. Jane Nelson has this. What do you think? Do you think we should do this this idea of not talking? Jane has this thing where I'll share this.
Yeah,
So
I think that would be interesting.
So Jane has this this concept she calls back talk back. So when a child is back talking to us, we sometimes get in the reactive mode of them back talking back to them, and it just becomes a back and forth of back talking back to each other, right? So I thought we'd do a bit of an exercise to kind of highlight this issue and talk about what it's like to experience this. So I'm going to, let's see, which one of you wants to be the parents? You don't have to get up or do anything, you're just going to have to read, what's on the page. It's not that big to do. Who wants to be the parent? Who wants to be the child?
I'll read it. You have to read it off the page?
Yeah, just read it off the page.
So I don't have to.
No, there's no thinking. Alright. And as a child, you simply have to listen. Or not listen. Whatever it is you're inclined to do. I'll take one. And also, do you want to be the typical parent or the positive discipline parent?
The typical parent.
Okay. Yeah, that's okay. That's alright.
We have about 5 minutes because we're interested.
Yes. Okay. So this will take about 5 minutes, and then we'll kind of come to an end. So during this activity, as during the last workshop, I would like the child to be reflecting on what you are thinking, feeling, and deciding to do as you're hearing these different statements. Okay. So we'll go back and forth. You said you'll be the typical parent, and I'll be the positive discipline parent. I get to be the good one.
Good, yeah.
The good one. You can be the bad one.
The good baby.
Yeah, right, exactly. So we'll just go back and forth, okay? Go ahead.
Don't talk to me that way, young lady.
So I'm going to pause 1 sec. So you are supposed to be saying, so what is it you're supposed to be saying? You're supposed to be saying, it's not on there, let me tell you. There is something the child is supposed to be saying. Okay, so as a child, you're going to start by saying, I don't have to. One of those typical things that a child might say, I don't have to. And you can even, as we go through, you can even improvise and change it a little bit. You can say, I don't have to, or I don't want to, or you can't make me. Any of those kinds of things is what you'll be saying, okay? Go ahead.
I don't have to.
Okay.
Don't talk to me that way, young lady.
And then say it back to me, and I'll
I don't have to.
I wonder what I did to upset you so much.
I don't want to.
Go to your room and don't come out until you can be respectful.
I don't want to.
Wow, you're really angry.
I don't want to.
You are grounded for a week.
I don't want to.
I need to take some time out until I can be with you respectfully.
You can't make me.
How can you talk to me that way after all I have done for you?
You can't make me.
I need a hug. Please come find me when you're ready for one.
I don't want to.
You just lost all your privileges.
I don't want to.
What would help us right now? Some positive time out or putting this on the family meeting agenda?
You can't make me.
Maybe military school will teach you to be more respectful of authority.
It's a big jump.
I tried to change that.
You can't make me.
I can hear you're really upset. Do you feel like telling me more? Let's pause there. There's only a couple more on there. This idea, I just want to pause for 1 second, just highlight also this idea of authority, being respectful to authority. This is, I feel like this is an idea which is really embedded in our society right now, is that it is like an ultimate value that children simply respect authority for the sake of respecting authority. And one thing I like about this program is that it really helps children to think for themselves and to not be so dependent on just following through with whatever the authority has established as the norm. You know what I mean? So children get to think for themselves about what's right for them and wrong for them. That's one thing I really appreciate about this program. Anyway, that was a side note. But as the child, what kinds of things were you thinking, feeling, and deciding to do as you were listening to the typical parent kind of talk back to you each time that you had something to say?
I feel like all the typical parent responses probably fueled the fire a little bit, just made me even angrier, whereas all the positive discipline was giving you a window to think and kind of pause and evaluate what you're feeling. Like it's the typical parent, all of that would just, like, even now make me angrier and make me want to talk back and you know, want to one up that parent, whereas the positive discipline parent, the questions are again just asking you to dig deep and figure out what the underlying issue is rather than going back and forth with angry language.
It's very easy, I know for myself, to get caught up in talking back.
A power struggle.
It's a power struggle.
It's a power struggle, yeah.
Yeah, like a child says something that you find disrespectful or hurts your feelings or something, or is simply not respecting your authority as the parent, you know? And sometimes my natural instinct is to just shoot back with something and just, you know, to win, basically, to win, to get caught up in the sense of winning over the child, you know?
Because they say so.
Right.
Because I think adults feel that they're losing the power, right? That's probably why we do it that way.
Yeah.
Right? Thinking that, you know, imposing something will give you more power. And the children, I believe, those that are doing that are looking for power. And so if we realize what's the underlying feeling of why the child is answering like that, or why they're doing that, then we can work on other situations to give them power. For example, the power to put the shoes on, the power to set the table, the power to, and we work on that, and then also that talking back will diminish, I believe, right? Especially as they grow, you know, it depends on the age of the child, but as they grow, I think it's super important that they feel that they have power too.
Okay, so I think that's all we have time to cover really today. There's a lot more to the program. There's a lot more skills. If you wanted to go on the Positive Discipline website and get some materials, we didn't get a chance to do the card set like we talked about doing, but this card set is really a great little tool to have. It's 50 cards, each one with a different positive discipline tool that you can use in a given moment. And a good thing even to go through, if they're old enough to do it, to go through with your kids and kind of pick and choose different ones that they think might be helpful to be using, you know. So this is a really great tool.
You can have them in a basket actually.
Yeah.
Have them pick one. If you cannot come up with solutions, or they cannot, then pick a card from the basket. So they're very, very helpful.
Yeah.
to announce the workshops.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, yep. For those watching online, thank you for joining the workshop series. Yeah, thank you guys for coming.
And our next workshop is on February 6th, the day in the life of a Cottage School student. And the next one is on February 10th, why Cottage School Elementary. In March, we have Dr. Welch doing mindfulness. And in April, Philip Rosenbach doing poetry appreciation. So thank you very much for following us. And we also have a holiday fundraiser going on. And you can